Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can all hear me. Welcome to this discussion that is organized by the European Policy Centre in cooperation with the US mission to the EU. It's part of our Transatlantic Challenges events program. The topic of today is the state of play in Russia's war in Ukraine and the need to reinforce transatlantic support. It's nearly 8 months since Russia began its brutal invasion of Ukraine, or I think 225 days. It still sounds incredible, actually, to think that this war's been going on for so long. But Ukraine is not only still standing, Ukraine is winning. And I think it's become increasingly obvious that Putin is getting quite desperate. His military is in tatters. His battle plans are shot through. But of course, this makes him perhaps more dangerous than ever. I mean, he's humiliated, so this makes him more dangerous since his hence his increasing nuclear threats that we've been hearing about now over the last few weeks and days, which are very worrying indeed. So we have an amazing group of speakers with us today to discuss the dynamics of the war, the major challenges that Ukraine, its allies and the West is facing, and what the West, the US and the EU in particular here, what they need to be doing more. I mean, they've done a lot, but they need to be doing much more. So we're going to be discussing that. So I want to briefly introduce the speakers that we have with us today. First of all, Masi Nayeem, who is a lawyer, but he's also a soldier. He was on the front line during this war and the previous war back in 2014. He's also a human rights activist. Olga Tokariuk, who is a well-known journalist and researcher at the Centre for European Policy Analysis. She's going to be joining us a bit later. Phillips O'Brien, who is Professor of Strategic Studies at St Andrews University in Scotland. Sven Mikser, member of the European Parliament for Estonia and a former defence minister there. And last but certainly not least, Melinda Haring, who is Deputy Director of the Russia and Eurasia Programme at the Atlantic Council. So welcome to all of you. Welcome again to the audience. I hope you're all going to have, many questions or comments. As usual, you can put these either by clicking on the hand icon or by typing them into the Q&A box. Just to let you know, if you didn't know this already, we have Ukrainian translation. So if you need that, you can click on the translation box, which is at the bottom of the screen, but you probably knew that anyway. So I want to open up the conversation now by starting with Masi, by asking you to give us a picture of the current dynamics on the battlefields. I mean, Ukrainian troops have been doing amazingly well. I mean, they've advanced in liberating occupied territory in the northeast and the south of the country. They've already been liberating a village, for example, in the Luhansk Oblast, and getting ever closer to the city of Kherson in the south. So can you share your views on the next possible moves and how Ukraine's military chiefs are going to be calculating in this Russian mobilization into their planning? So I give the floor to you first, Masi.
Дякую. Стосовно подальшого просування, ви знаєте, я думаю, що пріоритетним буде все ж таки це той напрямок ще й Запорізької області. Чому? Тому що фактично там є коридор, який сполучає частину дороги, яка йде з Криму, і сполучає з Донецькою областю. Тому я думаю, що одною з пріоритетних частин буде саме цей напрямок, і плюс я думаю, що це дасть можливість відрізати логістику росіянам доставки озброєння в Маріуполь і таке інше, і в той бік. Що стосується Херсонської області, я думаю, що найближчими днями, дай Боже, щоб було більше позитивних новин з приводу того, що вони просуваються в Херсонській області, тому що це теж один з пріоритетних напрямків. Що стосується Луганську, направда не володію інформацією більшою, ніж те, що ви знаєте публічно. Я не знаю, яка там зараз складається ситуація. Щодо мобілізації, ви знаєте, мені здається, що зараз, ви знаєте, що з настанням зими буде мінятися характер війни. Скоріше за все, що буде більше снайперських воєн і таке інше. Але сама мобілізація, вона саме в цей час Росії самі ускладнює організацію цієї мобілізації, тому що, звісно, що підготуватись до зими і підготувати підрозділи до зими буде набагато важче, ніж би вони це робили влітку. І це насправді дуже добра новина для нас. Проте, думаю, що треба буде готуватися, як то кажуть, до того генерала зими, до якого чекає весь час Росія, тому що вони вважали, що це сильна їх сторона. Воювати взимку, начебто хтось лякається. Насправді в Україні у українців немає переляку щодо зими. Я думаю, треба буде готуватися дійсно до того, що ці мобілізовані будуть посилювати ті території, які вже захоплені Росією, аби не дати можливість просуватися туди нашим регулярним військам. Мало ймовірно, що буде наступ з інших боків, як то прогнозують, що там буде наступ на Київ через Білорусь. Я думаю, що мобілізовані не будуть здатні пройти той рубіж якимось чином взагалі. Що стосується Білорусі, зрозуміло для мене, що звідти ніяких загроз, скоріш за все, що не буде. Принаймні так це виглядає картина зараз з тією інформацією, що є. Дякую.
Okay, thank you, Masi. Maybe I can just ask you to, on what you were saying about Belarus, what makes you so sure that mobilized Russians won't be sent to Belarus? I mean, what's the logic behind that?
Ви розумієте, для того, щоб просуватися і йти в рейд, для цього треба достатньо кількість більш-менш досвідчених військових. Мобілізовані, навіть якщо вони розбавлені певною кількістю кадрових офіцерів, не зможуть просунутись там, оскільки я ж кажу, що це трохи інший хист. Тобто навчити людей стояти в окопах можна за тиждень, 2-3 за місяць. Людей стріляти навіть теоретично можна з міномета за місяць-два. Просування вимагає трохи інших характеристик і якостей, які мають навчитися військовими. Наприклад, ми свого часу, коли в 2015 році нас мобілізували, ми проходили ці рейди, і ці рейди передбачали, що ми десь 3 чи 4 тижні були в лісах, просто знаходились, жили в тих лісах. А потім пішли на рейд, це були навчання, пішли в рейд, і ви знаєте, навіть тоді, коли поруч з нами було дуже багато кадрових офіцерів, ускладнювалося певною логістикою, там навичками в бою, коли ви просуваєтесь, заходите на територію чужу. Це інші якості, які потрібні були би для того, щоб стояти і захищати кордони вже зайняті. Для цього можна застосовувати менш кваліфікованих військових. Фактично Росія буде як пушечне м'ясо використовувати цих мобілізованих. В них низький дух моральний, і зрозуміло, що в них немає здібностей воювати і йти в рейд. це моя думка. Я думаю, що саме з цих підстав є мало ймовірним, що будуть йти з Білорусі централізовано заходити в Київ.
Maybe one last question before I move on to the next speaker. I mean, since the beginning of the war, the Russians have been using artillery to shell almost around the clock Ukrainian villages, towns, infrastructure, also missile strikes, but now increasingly they're using Iranian drones as well. Is this still as much of a challenge or a threat as it was, you know, a few months ago?
Ви знаєте, я думаю, що у Росії все ще немає проблем з тим, щоб доставляти через артобстріли незручності для тих територій, до яких вони доступуються. Але що стосується цих шахідів, дронів, це дійсно проблема, оскільки якщо раніше, щоб стрільнути по Білій церкві, треба була високоточна ракета, яка трохи дорожче, зараз цей дрон, який коштує дешевше, ніж ця ракета, і якщо в них їх дійсно буде багато, це буде завдавати певних неприємностей. Проте зенітні там установки, вони більш-менш можуть ще протистояти цим дронам. І ви знаєте, що, не знаю, по статистиці, от я знаю, що сьогодні тільки 3 дрони, здається, долетіли до своїх цілей. Я думаю, що з часом ми знайдемо і на це управу, тому що в принципі таких дронів раніше, такої дальності ми не мали на війні від них. Я думаю, що це є викликом, звісно, що є викликом, проте я не думаю, що це той виклик, який може змінити хід війни таким чином, що там, не знаю, Україна або буде програвати, або здавати території. Що точно буде проблемою через ці дрони, це цивільне населення і об'єкти критичної інфраструктури, тому що насправді на це буде бити Росія найбільше з метою завдати болю саме цивільним людям. Я не знаю, можливо, що в них така стратегія, щоб потім ці цивільні люди виходили на вулиці на акції протесту з метою припинити війну, змусити пана Зеленського це зробити. Можливо, що така стратегія є. Проте я думаю, що дійсно цими дронами найбільше під загрозою будуть саме цивільні і об'єкти критичної інфраструктури.
Okay, thank you very much, Masi. I'll come back to you a bit later. I now want to turn to Dr. O'Brien. You're a strategist, so I would like to ask you how you see, let's say, the next phase in Russia's, you know, as I would say, disastrous military campaign playing out. I mean, now that they've rolled out this mobilization, I mean, what does this really mean in terms of the impact on the war? How will it impact the dynamic? But also, how is it impacting, you know, Russia domestically?
Well, I'll talk about the war. I'm not really a Russian domestic expert, so I'm not sure anything I have to say about that would be terribly useful. But in terms of the war, I think basically the Russians are in a real dilemma on this mobilization. I mean, if they were all understood what kind of war they had unleashed, they would have started mobilizing in March or April, to be honest, when the reality of the disaster that Putin had started became apparent. Now they've started so late, and they've also started so disastrously, because it doesn't seem there had been any real organization. There had been no plan. I mean, usually when you mobilize, you have a training system set up. You have trainers who are ready to accept the new troops. You have a whole process of creating new units. Whereas what the Russians seemed to simply do was go around and round up bodies and say, you're now going to be in the army, and without any large infrastructure in place to train those troops. So, and this is the problem they face, that if they're going to do this properly, they're going to need many months. I mean, 6 months is actually too short to generate proper troops. I would say 9 months minimum. And that's if they were ready. On the other hand, they seem to have this desire to get some of the troops in combat as soon as possible. Those troops will be of almost no value. If anything, they'll be on negative value because they won't know what they're doing and they could cause chaos. But the problem is they need help now. This is the dilemma they face. They need help now, but they don't have anything except these untrained troops. What we are at is an interesting phase now of the war. In many ways, the war has been on a continual path since February 24th. And this is something I've been talking about over the last few months. There actually has been a continual transformation almost daily between February 24th and today. And that is every day of the war, Russia has gotten weaker. All right. The army, the best army it ever had, the best equipped, supplied, and trained force was on February 24th. Every day between February 24th and now has basically seen the Russian army be weakened. So the army we have now is smaller, it's far less well equipped, it's less well trained, it's in less, the motivation seems less. On the other hand, Ukraine, though it might not have been apparent outside, has been getting stronger almost every day. So that the weakest the Ukrainians ever were was on February 24th. They had by far the least, they had less advanced systems than they have now. The Ukrainians had far fewer really well-trained troops. Now they have a lot of very well-trained troops operating more advanced systems in what looks like very high morale. They have a well laid out command structure. They have an intellectual understanding of the war. So what we've seen is sort of a crossing of the lines. And basically, in the last month, the Russian weakness has gotten to the point and Ukrainian strength has crossed over, and Russia has to reverse that. But I don't know how they reverse. This is the problem they have, is they're on a trajectory of getting weaker, and they can't get stronger until they get these mobilized troops actually in the field. And by the way, get them equipped. We don't know what their equipment status is. Can they actually provide these troops? So this is the real problem. And until Russia changes that trend line, the Ukrainians are going to be on the offensive. They're the ones with the initiative. And all the Russians can really do for now is try to hold on while the Ukrainians press them.
But does this not make it more likely that Putin can do something outrageous? I mean, as he's been talking about regularly now for weeks, I mean, including, the use of a nuclear strike or a nuclear weapon somehow or other. I mean, a tactical weapon or something else, or maybe an attack at one of the nuclear plants in Zaporizhzhia, releasing, radiation or something along these lines, something very ugly and typical to him.
I mean, I'm going to say something that's not going to be very comforting to people. I don't think Putin will ever use nuclear weapons, but I've always gotten Putin wrong. So, but that's been my assumption on Putin, because I don't see the strategic value of Russia to winning the war by the use of nuclear weapons. I mean, the tactical nuclear weapons we're talking about are horrible, but it'd be very hard to say seriously damage the Ukrainian army without damaging the Russian army at the same time, unless you could find a sort of clustered group of military bases or something that they feel they can hit. The other option would be a terror bombing of a city, and that would, if anything, I don't know, the Ukrainian resolve if a city was hit by a tactical nuke would probably be the other. So I'm not quite sure what it does, other than it's a signal to the world that he's so nuts that he's going to just go up. I don't, that there's no limits to what he will do. The problem that he'll face is right now, Ukraine has the army to keep fighting. Even if he say convinces Western Europe that he might escalate, that doesn't mean the Ukrainians will stop fighting. So, I mean, that's why I'm not, and I also think, by the way, there was the reaction of China and India to the use of nuclear weapons would be not positive. The Chinese don't want to see a nuclear war break out here, and the Chinese, from what we can tell, are already pretty uneasy with the way the war is going. Now, that's a logical point of view. So logically, I don't think he'd use them, but I logically didn't think he'd invade because I thought the invasion would be such a catastrophe. So, make of that what you will. I get Putin wrong.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, we'll come back again to this nuclear question a bit later, but I want to turn now to Sven Mikser, Estonian MEP. I mean, Estonia has been one of the strongest voices in support for Ukraine. I mean, you understand the country very well. You also understand Russia very well. But first of all, I'd like to ask you to give perhaps your interpretation of how you see the situation in Russia now. I mean, the following the mobilization and the criticism that we've seen coming from some people towards Putin's policy. I mean, he's deflected that onto the Ministry of Defense. So I'd be interested to see how you see the dynamic in Russia as the first question, but then secondly to ask you about the EU. I mean, the EU has shown very strong unity up until now. I mean, it's unprecedented since the beginning of the war. But do you think it could become more difficult to hold this unity together against the backdrop of the energy and the cost of living crisis? And is this what the Russians are waiting for this unity to start to erode? So I give the floor to you, Mr. Mikser.
Thank you very much. There were quite a few questions. First of all, on the situation inside Russia. Well, virtually everyone in Estonia is a Russia expert, but unfortunately, I am one of the very few who do not consider themselves Russia experts. But obviously, with this mobilization, Putin has broken this contract that his regime had with the Russian society, and now everyone has been dragged into the war, which inevitably makes the war less popular, makes it more difficult for people to simply ignore the ongoing war and try to go on with their everyday business. So I think that Putin's position in Russia and the support for the regime in Russia has suffered as a result of this mobilization, and obviously the bad news from the battlefield and the botched way the mobilization has been carried out, they also further complicate his position. What that means, how that will affect his behavior, whether it will make him more erratic and more unpredictable, that's difficult to say. But obviously, at one point, also the cracks inside the inner circle, inside the leadership, top of the political leadership as well as military leadership will become to get more visible, more exposed. And now Europe. Well, I think that Europe has demonstrated on one hand very remarkable unity during this more than half a year now. Obviously, we have done many unprecedented things by delivering lethal weapon systems to a country effectively at war, well, that's something that's pretty much unprecedented. The speed and unity of our action, I think, is a bit less. Well, it's only quite as impressive if we put the 0 hour on the 24th February. Because obviously Europe was not very much prepared for this, even though the intelligence information suggesting that war was imminent started coming in much earlier. My own country, Estonia, for example, took a decision to donate some weapons to Ukraine already several months before the fighting broke out. But with regard to sorry, with regard to some of those weapon systems, we were unable to actually deliver them because we did not receive the country of origin well license or certificate, because this was at that point considered to be, well, escalatory, if you wish. But since February the 24th, we have done quite a lot. Obviously, we need to do much more. We have used European Peace Facility, but the peace facility originally was foreseen for totally different kinds of things, and obviously the net worth of that facility for this budget period is only slightly over 5 billion euros. So compared to what, for example, the Americans have been giving to Ukrainians, this will not do the trick. And plus, obviously, Europe is not a unitary state when it comes to defense aid. Like the Americans are in that particular policy area. Defense continues to be very much a national competence. And so we have this clearinghouse principle, we have this logistical hubs, but still, I think we need to do much more, and we need to do it much much faster, much quicker. And the other thing is sanctions, obviously, and here indeed, since it's sanctions are a consensus decision, we are only as strong as the weakest link in the chain. And well, with regard to, for example, depriving Russia of its oil and gas revenues, we know about the cracks already that already exist in this consensus. It's well, different perhaps with the personal sanctions on individuals who are responsible for a variety of different crimes. I think that one area that is slightly understated sometimes is tech-related sanctions. I think these take a little bit longer to actually have visible effect, but I think the actual effect of technology-related sanctions on Russia's ability to produce and export and also rearm is actually very significant, has been already since 2014.
Thank you. I just want to stay on the topic of military aid for a moment. I just published a paper today calling on the EU to quadruple military aid to Ukraine. So that's, you know, just my advertisement for myself. But I would like to ask you, I mean, some EU member states, I mean, some of the biggest ones have actually contributed nearly nothing in military aid. I mean, for example, France, Germany, and some others. I mean, unlike your own country, as you rightly said, has contributed, you know, huge. I mean, Estonia is one of the biggest contributors in terms of GDP. So why do you think there's still resistance from some countries? Why is that still there? I mean, at this point in the war, I mean, it's more important than ever that Ukraine receives the maximum amount of arms, heavy arms, the things that are really important to push back against the Russians. I mean, is there still some concerns? I mean, I find that hard to believe, but I'm just wondering, is there still some concerns or worries about doing that from some countries?
Well, there are two reasons, I think, for that. One is political, and that there are still these lingering fears that something we may do by way of helping Ukraine could be sort of escalatory. Even Americans, I mean, have reservations about delivering some really long-range systems because they believe that these can be used to hit targets inside Russia proper, and they don't want to see that. I think in Europe, those fears in some quarters in Europe are even more, even stronger. So yes, that's one side. The other thing is that early in the conflict, much of what was donated was old Soviet legacy systems that some of our countries still had in their inventory. And these stocks have been depleted, and obviously, I mean, with the war going on, Ukraine needs more modern and more long range and better systems, and these are not standing idle somewhere in the warehouses in Central Eastern European countries. So and also with these sort of surplus stocks having been donated already, more and more governments are speaking about the need to replenish their own stocks. So it's also a strain, I think, on industry to a degree. because obviously we have been taking out collectively this peace dividend for far too long. So our ability to sort of produce so as to be able to donate, and obviously during times of war the attrition is enormous. So you cannot just say that, well, we need this much and then we are good. You need to keep donating. At the same time, you cannot give away everything that you believe you need for your own defense. Although with in case of Germany and France, I cannot quite see how their own physical security might suffer if they gave away some of their more modern systems that Ukraine so badly needs to actually defeat the aggressor, who's also, from the point of view of the NATO collectively, is the prime adversary.
Okay, thank you so much. I just want to welcome Olga. I can see that she's just arrived. Welcome to you. I want to turn now to Melinda. I want to say as well to a certain degree on this arms issue. But first of all, Melinda, I'd like to ask you, I mean, from a US perspective, I mean, the United States is far away from Ukraine, it's on the other side of the ocean. I mean, what sort of, support is there nowadays? I mean, not just from, I mean, obviously from the American government is still a strong support, but I mean, how is the war now viewed by, the US population in general? I mean, has it disappeared from the radar? I mean, in Europe, it has sort of started to slip away. And then I would like to ask you about, I mean, the ability of Washington to continue to keep delivering the quantities of military aid that it has done until now. I mean, sometimes it seems like there's a new aid package coming, every other day. I mean, it's been amazing. Could we expect to see a reduction in this? And how could the midterm elections, I mean, how could they impact the US approach to Ukraine?
Thank you, Amanda. It's great to be with everyone. It's in particular a great honor to share this panel with Masi. Masi, you captivated everyone at the Yes conference 3 weeks ago, and I am a great admirer of your family. I know and love your brother, and you were a lawyer for my friends, and it was an ordinary case, and you won the case, and your family, I think, represents the best of Ukraine's service, and I just want to honor everything that you've done. So thank you. It's really an honor to be here with you. Amanda, thanks for these questions. I think I get 3 questions, and I want to shoot back at Phillips as well, if you don't mind, just to make the discussion a little more interactive. So I'll answer your... Oh, sorry. I'm married to a New Yorker and it's influenced me. I'm sorry. I'll try to speak a little more slowly. Sorry. Okay, I'm so sorry. Okay, so my task is to explain what's going on in the US. Yes, we keep sending many packages. In particular, Amanda, I think that the messaging from the Biden administration has been very good after Putin did the sham annexations and the sham referenda. So the US and President Biden's team is sending a message. As soon as those annexations happened, we put another package out, and that the message is clear. We will not be intimidated. We will continue to send as much assistance as Ukraine needs. Would I give the Biden administration a perfect grade? No, they're about 3 weeks too late. They're still very shy and nervous about escalation. And they create red lines, and then they overcome these red lines. So we've seen them do this time and time again. And right now, the discussion is focused on the kind of rockets that should be sent. Many analysts, including this one in my community, think that we should be giving Ukraine everything it needs, the long-range rockets for HIMARS and the ATACMS. But the White House is still too nervous about that. And hopefully they will overcome those inhibitions very, very soon. In general, though, I think the HIMARS systems deserve a lot of praise. The White House announced that it's sending 4 more. We've sent 16. We're sending 4 more that will arrive soon, and we've pledged to send 18 more. 18 more is great, but it can take up to 1 year to send those 18. Why? Masi and the Ukrainians need these weapons now. What the hell are we doing? Let's get them out of storage and get them to Ukraine. We can do it better and faster. Now, in terms of sentiment in the United States, I'm really happy to say that sentiment is really strong. There's American flags everywhere. There's statements of support, and it's not organized. I drove past the Russian embassy, Masi, yesterday in Washington, D.C., and there's a giant Ukrainian flag on the apartment building across the street. There's Ukrainian signs everywhere. The sentiment is strong. We are with you, and we will continue to be with you. The American people are captivated by this struggle, and it's similar to our struggle as Americans. We understand it, even though it's 5,000 miles away. And I can tell you that there's enormous amounts of fundraising going on across the country. We will be with you. So I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about the MAGA Republicans, Amanda. Trump's brand of Republicans have really perverted the party, and I can say that as a Republican. I'm still one, though I'm not sure why some days. And there are a lot of worrying signs. So let me give you 2 data points. There's a poll that came out that shows that the number of Americans, of Republican voters who think that we're doing too much for Ukraine has doubled. From February to May, the number doubled from 13 to 26%. So that's alarming. And the problem is that this type of Republican that says, put the assistance dollars into Montana rather than HIMARS systems, that argument dominates cable television in the United States, especially Fox News. And more moderate mainstream Republicans like this one and others can't make messages and explain why supporting Ukraine is in U.S. national interests. So that's a big part of the reason why the Republican Party has gone off the rails. We were a party that believes in strength. I remember Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, and that's the party that I'm proud to be part of. But unfortunately, that part of the party is very, very small. We are dinosaurs, and there's not very many of us. There's also some other polling, though, that is more reassuring. If you look at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, it shows that a majority of Americans have Ukraine's back. We support sanctions. We support more weapons. We support more financial aid, and we will support it until the end. It is undefined. We will stand with you. So I know the headlines can be grim when you listen to Tucker Carlson and you listen to Fox News. He doesn't represent Americans. He doesn't represent our heart. We get it. And the good news is the media is giving more attention to Ukraine as well because of the counteroffensive, because Ukraine is winning. And we see that. And we see that Vladimir Putin is on his heel. So I think that it's a good news story. There's going to be more assistance, both charitable contributions, both economic assistance, and then also that financial assistance in Masi. We are beating up the decision makers in Washington every day and telling them, send the weapons that you need now. So thank you, Amanda. And when you give me a chance, I have a response to Phillips on Ukraine and Russian army strength, but I'm gonna be quiet. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Melinda. Very straight to the point as usual. So thank you for that. But I want to come to Olga now. Welcome, Olga. I mean, I think everybody here is probably reading your tweets every day. I mean, you're very proactive. So I'd like to hear a bit from you. I mean, what are your biggest fears now in terms of the West? I mean, do you fear that there is going to be a reduction in support? There's going to be a fatigue. What is it that you would like to see more of now, and how can this be achieved?
Thank you, Amanda, and hi, everyone. I apologize for being slightly late. I've recently moved to the UK, to Oxford, for a fellowship with the Reuters Institute, and that's why I'm tweeting maybe less than usual, but I'll be back hopefully on track with my usual activities soon. Being, of course, here in the UK, I can see also the support in this country, and it's actually comfortable and comforting to be here, because when I mention to someone that I'm Ukrainian, I immediately receive feedback and support, and people express how much, they stand with Ukraine. Although maybe there are less Ukrainian flags than before. That's what the people here told me, that after Queen's death, they were putting out the UK flags instead of Ukrainian ones, and then some of them maybe forgotten to put Ukrainian flags back. But we brought our Ukrainian flag from Ukraine, so soon there will be one huge Ukrainian flag more in Oxford in a window. So aside from that, of course, the issue of continuing support is of utmost importance. And I'm very happy to hear from Melinda that the US will stand firmly, and well, hopefully that even the midterms election and their outcome will not change this firm and decisive support for Ukraine. I'm sure also about the UK, it will not be an issue with the new government led by Liz Truss. The support from the UK will continue. My concern is about the European Union, and namely the heavyweights of the European Union, Germany and France. And in particular, I've been having conversations here also with some people who have access to very good sources in Brussels, and they raised the alarm about the funding that was already promised to Ukraine on behalf of the European Union, but that is being delayed now. I'm not talking now about the funding for Ukrainian military or the armed forces. This is the fund that has been promised that is needed to support Ukrainian economy that is also suffering. And Russia is waging a hybrid war, so it's not only the war on the battlefield, but this is also a war to weaken Ukrainian economy, to of course attack Ukraine using disinformation and undermine support for Ukraine in other countries. And we are seeing some activity on that front recently. So the issue of continuing to support Ukraine financially, continuing to support Ukrainian economy, especially as the winter is coming, and it is almost certain that Ukrainians will face a very harsh winter, that in many regions of Ukraine there will be issues and problems with ensuring electricity and heating supplies, of course, because of Russian missile attacks and because of the destruction of infrastructure that Russia has been doing and will most probably ramp up in the coming weeks. But also Ukrainian government needs to be able to pay salaries, to pay pensions, to pay benefits, so that people can survive and they can feed their families. So this economic financial support, and especially the support that has already been promised and pledged, is crucial. This money should arrive to Ukraine, and this support also must be stepped up. So in addition, of course, to continuing support with the weapons, because as I and other speakers said before, the US will continue supporting Ukraine, the UK will continue supporting, but what about the European Union, the countries of the Western Europe? Because definitely the Baltic states and Poland will continue putting pressure on Brussels and on their counterparts in Berlin and Paris. But we should be constantly, I think, talking to German and to French, and demanding more support to Ukraine. So that's, I think, at this point, my biggest concern.
Thank you, Olga. You raised a lot of points there, and I totally agree with you in terms of the speed of the financial assistance, Ukrainian economy, the humanitarian situation on the ground. There's a desperate need to have a quicker reciprocation of international finance. So thank you for raising this. And I want to stay with the issue of the humanitarian situation, and I want to turn back now to you, Masi. The situation for many people in Ukraine now is really, it's tragic. The humanitarian situation on the ground going into the winter now, as Olga has just mentioned, but people have had their houses, destroyed, their families destroyed. War crimes have been carried out since the beginning of this brutal war. So can you just give us a sort of insight into the key issues that need to be addressed in terms of the humanitarian situation on the ground? What does Ukraine need more of? Of course, financial assistance, but is there other things that they need to help alleviate the hell of this humanitarian disaster that people are living through? I'm talking about mobile water units and stuff like this. Practical things that can be done.
Ви знаєте, у мене у самого мама померла, коли ми були на війні в Афганістані. І я думаю, що одним з найважливіших речей, які зараз потребуватимуть громадяни, це медицина. Насправді, тому що буде багато простужені люди, це мінімум, але і ліків цих буде замало туди доставити. Треба, щоб вони були, і з цим буде проблема найпершу чергу. Завжди на війні це Тим паче зараз, коли зима, це буде велика проблема. По-друге, це дійсно пов'язано з обігрівом, тому що пошкоджені здебільшого в тих регіонах, де є лінія фронту, там пошкоджені теплотраси і таке інше. Тобто тепло – це те, чого буде не вистачати. Проте, якщо казати, наприклад, для військових, це вирішити буде достатньо складно, оскільки це тільки одяг, тому що ви не можете обігріватися, тому що ви дасте свої позиції. То для цивільних це, да, обігрів, це мається на увазі і стаціонарні, вибачте, ми говоримо тут буржуйка, але маємо на увазі пічку, в якій ми можемо топити за допомогою дрів. Шалена проблема буде для дітей. Мені здається, що особливо ті діти, які залишились там, це взагалі, мені здається, найвеличезнішою проблемою війни. Чому вони там є, але так як вони там опинились, вірніше, вивести їх на материкову частину, вірніше, на міста, де немає війни, достатньо складно, тому що батьки не хочуть залишати місця, де вони мають квартиру, тому що будь-який переїзд в місто має зобов'язує платити орендну плату, їсти треба якось, роботи немає, і тому вони залишаються там. Діти теж там залишаються. Тобто, я думаю, допомога в частині того, щоб забезпечити цим людям житло на тих територіях, де немає війни, це дуже було би важливо. Чесно, ви знаєте, що у нас в Україні є дуже багато волонтерів, які допомагають війні, але через те, що дуже багато допомагають війні, ще менше почали допомагати цивільним людям, звичайним переселенцям, оскільки на це не вистачає уваги всього суспільства. І ці люди дуже сильно страждають зараз, перебуваючи в місті. Ми навіть в Києві знаємо деяких людей, які не мають за що жити, тому що вони переселенці звідти. Що ще бракуватимемо на тих територіях, це, звісно, що їжа, але в тому сенсі їжа, що умовні консерви м'ясні, це перше, чого зазвичай бракувало в містах, в яких починалися бойові дії. Чомусь їх розкопають не перше. І, власне, знову ж таки, для дітей це важливо мати такий раціон. І вода, насправді. Як ви знаєте, в Миколаєві зараз величезна проблема з цим. Волонтери направили на це, намагаються допомагати цим. Але насправді це дуже великі обсяги води, які треба якимось чином доставляти туди. І теж є певна небезпека в цій логістиці. На мою думку, це все, що я можу зараз пригадати. Дякую.
Thank you, Masi, for raising these, important issues. The issues related to children, to health, to water. I mean, these are really crucial. So I'd like to come back to Olga now, maybe to pick up a bit more on this. I mean, related to the role that these activists and civil society is playing in Ukraine on the ground. I mean, Ukraine has an amazing civil society. So how important are these networks? In parallel to the government, in working on the ground and getting support from the West. I mean, how active are they in reaching out to different actors in the West to get more support for Ukraine on humanitarian and other issues?
Yes, well, I think that in the last 8 years, civil society in Ukraine was really remarkably strengthened. So it was strong even before and diverse and influential. But since 2014, since the revolution of dignity and the start of the war, the start of the Russian aggression in Ukraine, I think it's really when the civil society showed itself at its best. First, helping to equip the Ukrainian army back in 2014, when the first networks of volunteers who were raising money for the government, for the army, for the armed forces, for their volunteer battalions that were not integrated into the armed forces back in 2014, but were integrated since then. And these networks continue to operate, and they only grew bigger, stronger, and more influential. So, just like on top of my head, several NGOs that are helping to equip the Ukrainian army with everything necessary. Of course, the government now provides a big part, and also the Western partners are sending a lot of assistance. But still, there are some gaps which are covered by these charity NGOs. For example, tactical medicine kits, something that is necessary, crucial on the battlefield. They help saving lives. And the tactical medicine kits are very expensive. So the most, the simplest, the most basic one starts from $100 and more. Well, of course, for Ukraine, it's a lot of money. So this charity organizations such as, for example, Leleka Foundation, which I personally have been supporting with my own money and, also raising money for them. They are highly trusted. They've been operating for years in this field. So they are really making a huge difference in supplying this life-changing, life-saving tactical medicine kits. There are a lot of individual fundraising initiatives to, for example, buy vehicles for the Ukrainian army, because the vehicles, not necessarily military, military vehicles. There could be civilian cars like Humvees, 4x4 jeeps, which are very necessary for the Ukrainian soldiers on the battlefield, and they are also very quickly disposable, so they get destroyed, the windows are getting smashed. So there is a constant need for this type of vehicles for Ukrainian soldiers on the battlefield, and this need is not covered by the supplies that are coming from the West. So this is where, again, the civil society has to step in to, raise the money inside Ukraine and outside Ukraine to help supply these vehicles to the soldiers. This is when we are speaking about the military side. Then, of course, on the civilian side, and I agree with Masi that the situation, the humanitarian situation of internally displaced people is an issue, and is a very important issue. And I know personally a lot of cases when people from dangerous areas such as Kharkiv, for example, who have fled their city and moved to the west of Ukraine and stayed there for a few months, they were then returning to Kharkiv, even despite the fact that it wasn't safe yet, and there were still Russian bombings continuing every day, just because they ran out of money to rent the property, in other parts of the country, or they couldn't find a job there. So there should be, I think, also more support to civilians from the areas that have been most affected by the military actions. We are seeing now Russia also shifting its focus on attacking civilians in southern part of Ukraine, in industrial areas that are heavily populated, such as Dnipro, such as Zaporizhia. Just in the last week, there were several missile attacks on those regions, killing civilians and sending many others into, probably a state of, if not panic, because no one is actually panicking in Ukraine, but in a state of, again, reflection. What should we do? Should we stay, or should we move to other parts of Ukraine? Should we go abroad? And many people are not doing that, also because of the reasons that Masi outlined, that, they do not have enough resources, they do not have enough money, and also there are no available resources, not much available resources left to host these people in the western part of Ukraine. The rent prices there have skyrocketed. Now renting an apartment in Lviv is more expensive than renting an apartment in Kyiv, because it is considered a safer part of the country, and the pattern is similar in all of the western Ukraine. But with the jobs there, the situation is more difficult. The prices are higher, but there are not enough jobs available to give them to people arriving from southern and eastern parts of the country, which, again, I want to stress, are more densely populated. And, therefore, more people there are under attack and are in a very precarious situation. The same thing applies to refugees. The stream of refugees from Ukraine has basically dried out, but not because there is no danger to these people inside Ukraine, or that their regions are now safe and they are able to live a normal life, but because the capacity also to host refugees in many countries seems to be exhausting. Germany has imposed restrictions. Some lands in Germany have imposed restrictions on arrivals of new Ukrainian refugees. Here in the UK, there are basically no sponsors who would be willing to assist Ukrainian refugees left. And you can only come to the UK if you're a refugee from Ukraine, if you have someone here who would offer you to host you in your house. So you cannot just like travel freely as you can in countries of the European Union. So this is becoming an issue too. So, you know, the problem is still there. The humanitarian situation is dire and it will only get worse during winter times. But the resources to host both internally displaced people and refugees are getting exhausted. But, you know, but these people still need help and they still need assistance and support.
Thank you, Olga. I want to come back to you now, Melinda, again on this topic. I'm going to return to the military situation in a minute, but I want to follow through on this. I mean, Melinda, I mean, do you think there's more that can be done? I mean, what more can be done to alleviate the humanitarian situation in Ukraine and the very difficult economic situation? I mean, also, it's highly likely that the Russians will pull out of the grain deal in November. I mean, President Putin has mentioned this, you know, a few times, that he's very unhappy with where the grain is going. This would obviously be a huge blow to Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine was hoping this deal could actually be expanded to allow them to export other goods. So what could be the, you know, I mean, the economic repercussions of that? And if there's anything that can be done to prevent that? I mean, more Turkish diplomacy, perhaps, or something else?
Thanks, Amanda. I want to go straight to Masi and Olga's excellent interjections. I say focus on children and mothers who are bearing the brunt of this war. In particular, focus on housing. In order to get people to come back to cities like Chernihiv that were heavily destroyed, you need apartments, you need housing, and you need jobs, and you need access to capital, but you also need schools. Amanda, the Ukrainian government needs help putting bomb shelters in schools so that they can reopen. Only 3,000 schools were able to reopen in the fall. So this means millions of Ukrainian kids are doing another year of online education. This is the third year, 2 years of COVID, and then half a year of war. Ukraine is not going to be globally competitive if it can't have in-person education. I know that this is a lesser priority in the midst of war, but we have to protect Ukraine's children. And this is easy and cheap. It's only $15,000 to build a bomb shelter in a village school. It's $50,000 to build a bomb shelter in the city of Kyiv. This is where European governments, the UK, could really lean in. This is not very much money. We can get Ukrainian kids back to school now if we put some money into this. But I would really encourage governments to lean into housing and look into how to stimulate job markets in places that are safe, like Chernihiv. There's a great tradition of small and medium business owners and entrepreneurship in Ukraine, and in particular, Olga's really smart comment about the Western Ukraine, about businesses relocating there. We need to be putting all of our donor dollars into getting businesses restarted. I know there's a huge effort to move businesses from the Donbass to Ivano-Frankivsk and to Lviv Oblast. Let's make sure they have the capital that they need. There's great stories. The New York Times did a good piece on it, on Tushonka factories, the canned tin goods moving west, and all sorts of things, seat belts, you know, industrial equipment. So I think that that's a great opportunity, and more can be done. On the grain question, I think I should defer to you because you're the real turkey expert. But look, I don't know that Putin knows he probably can't get away with it. I'm having this argument now. I think he does have leverage. He is threatening to not sign this deal. It's one of his points of leverage. He also can cut Russian oil off when the price cap comes into place. So those are two areas of leverage I'm watching. Yes, let's see more diplomacy from Erdogan. You know, I don't think it's self-interested diplomacy. Fine, but let's also get the global South engaged as well to make sure that Ukraine can export the grain and keep the world fed. Thank you.
Thanks, Melinda. I want to go back now to you, Dr. O'Brien, to come back to this nuclear issue. because we've already discussed, you know, sort of the one side of it. I mean, how likely is it going to happen? But the other question is, I mean, how prepared is the West for, you know, any form of nuclear strike? I mean, are there some, you know, plans or responses already in place, or are we just, you know, not at that point yet? Is there a bit of wishful thinking going on that it might never happen?
By the way, Amanda, call me Phil. You don't have to keep calling me Dr. O'Brien. In terms of the use of nuclear weapons in the West, in some ways, of course, this has now been something that's been thought about for the past 7 months, if not longer. It's probably been the most thought about nuclear scenario since the Cold War, and in many ways more thought out than nuclear scenarios in certain times of the Cold War. So I don't think anyone could say it's not been thought about, and I'm sure the Biden administration, by the way, I think we can see by how the Biden administration has been very careful, some would say overly careful, in judging its escalation, how worried it is about nuclear war. I mean, we talk about Ukraine receiving a lot of aid. It's received a lot of specific kinds of aid. There have been certain kinds of aid that have not, Ukraine's not got any of. We have fixed wing aircraft of the modern type, NATO standard armored fighting vehicles. And that's because I think of a fear of escalation that could result in a nuclear war. So it's certainly very much on the Biden administration's mind, and it's very much one that they are thinking about. I'm not sure, the problem that they would have is not that this, I don't think they're thinking that they will respond nuclearly. They won't. And they know that Putin doesn't want a nuclear war with NATO or with the United States, because the world loses, but Russia really loses in any kind of nuclear exchange. So what they are probably judging, and I'm actually, Melinda probably knows this better than I do, being on the East Coast, is how do you respond to a nuclear attack into Ukraine conventionally, but to make it hurt? And that's the one they want to, that's what they're sort of working out in their minds. It wouldn't be a nuclear response. I can't imagine it would be a nuclear response. By the way, they don't need to. I mean, this is a very weird international situation. The United States conventionally could end this war tomorrow. The Russian military, it could just devastate it. Yeah, if the United States wanted to end the war conventionally and wasn't worried about a nuclear war, the war would be over, because they would just absolutely crush what, you know, what's there of the Russian army. So their entire reflection is, what can we give, or what would we do, which would allow us to devastate the Russian army, but not lead to a greater nuclear escalation. And that's the debate that's going on. I think they're being probably erring so far on the cautious side. I mean, there does seem to be the Biden administration is on the whole being relatively cautious in what it does, but that would be a guess.
But what would your advice be? I mean, as a strategist, to the administration?
I mean, my advice would be, what you're giving Ukraine, just give it a lot more of what you've been giving it, because right now they're doing a heck of a good job. I mean, what's astonishing, I mean, people talk about, again, the aid, but Ukraine's only been given certain kinds of aid, and they've done astonishingly well with it. And they now have armed forces that have adjusted to that. So what it would be very hard for Putin to say, I must escalate if you give more of what you have been giving, you know, a lot more of that. And I would get it to them now, because this is a really important strategic window for Ukraine. The Russian army is in bad shape. It's not going to generate new forces for a while under this conscription. Now is the time that the Ukrainians can do a great deal of damage to it. So getting aid now, as much aid now, is, I think, vital.
Okay, thank you, Phil. And now, Sven, I would like to ask you perhaps what's the other side of the coin of that question, not the response to the nuclear threat, but a response to the collapse or the crumbling of Russia in the event that, you know, President Putin is deposed, or there's, you know, I don't know, cross-country uprising. I mean, from an EU perspective, I mean, how much thinking is there already going on into, you know, this possible, you know, outcome, and what the response should be, because I mean it wouldn't be something, I mean it wouldn't be a small event. I mean it could have mammoth ramifications, you know, well, not just for Europe, but I mean large parts of Asia, etc.
Well, I believe I might be a bit better positioned to comment on the nuclear side than on what exactly might happen to Russia. And if I may, I would say a couple of words about the nuclear. I agree that I can see what Putin might expect to gain by threatening to use nuclear weapons. I cannot quite see what he can expect to gain by actually using the nuclear weapons, even tactical nuclear weapons, in Ukraine. And the question is, what kind of strike would he use? In the Cold War days, substrategic nuclear weapons were primarily meant to sort of stop an onslaught of massive armored formations, something that the Ukrainians are not using on the battlefield in Ukraine. And also since the end of the Cold War and in Putin's Russia, there has been this, in the Russian doctrine, the concept of de-escalation by escalation, whereby they would use tactical nuclear strike to actually escalate a conventional conflict they cannot possibly win in order to de-escalate the sort of strategic situation. But I think it has been made absolutely clear to Putin that he would not be able to de-escalate this ongoing war by using a tactical nuclear weapon. And there have been a stream of retired US generals going around the TV stations, basically delivering the message that this kind of strike would be met by a massive and decisive conventional counterstrike by the US and NATO allies. And I think that a similar message has been given by more sort of clandestine hidden channels from official Washington and other Western capitals. But on what would happen to Russia? I mean, it again, it depends on how Putin will go. And I think the most until recently, the most likely scenario of Putin's exit has been considered sort of some sort of palace coup. But I think that the probability of that happening in the very near future is not actually that high, unfortunately. I think that Putin cannot win this war, and ultimately he cannot survive the defeat as a leader of Russia. But I would not like to speculate at this point as to what kind of successor regime there would be. I think that it's absolutely clear that in order for Russia to cease to be a threat to international peace and security, denazification of Russia needs to happen. Basically, there has to be a sort of national reckoning of some sort. Russian people will have to come to terms to their own history, to their own past, and they will have to own up and admit to having facilitated the rise of this dictatorship that has committed those heinous crimes against international peace and against humanity and against Ukrainian people in particular. So I think this is the only way to make sure that this war is not repeated in Ukraine or somewhere else.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, I want to put the question that we have in the chat box from the Lithuanian journalist Evaldas Labuskas, and I'm sorry if I totally messed up your name there. And he's just asking whether support for the Russian opposition can be considered as support for Ukraine. And in general, what do you think about the Russian political opposition and its influence in Russia and cooperation with the West? Is that something that you could also answer, Sven?
Well, obviously, Putin has been over the years very careful not to allow any real opposition to emerge in Russia. So I think that Russian opposition is very weak, very fragmented. Whoever becomes more visible and gains more traction in the society is either assassinated or put in jail. But obviously, I mean, as we see Putin using these sort of influence operations in our societies, I think we should be engaged in reaching out to Russian people and doing what little we can do to turn the tide of public opinion in Russia against Putin and Putin's war. But I think to speak of Russian opposition at this point, that's perhaps a bit of wishful thinking.
Absolutely, yeah. We just have 5 minutes left, so I would like to put the last point to all of you. I would like you all to think of, you know, one thing that Ukraine's allies should do for Ukraine immediately. I mean, what would be the top thing that they should do now, like in the next 5 minutes or so? So start with you, Masi, and then go through the rest of the speakers.
Мені здається, ви знаєте, мені здається, що треба, щоб всі союзники змогли це транслювати, що Росія і війна, яку вона розв'язала, це проблема росіян, не Путіна окремо, не конкретних якихось політиків, ну і так далі. Чому це важливо? Тому що тільки, мені здається, можливо, я зараз не правий, мені здається, що тільки самі росіяни всередині можуть нормально розібратися з Росією як такою. В тому сенсі, що тільки коли вони усвідомлять, як вони живуть, з чим вони живуть і ким вони зараз стали для світу, тільки тоді вони зможуть змінити, зупинити зсередини Росію. Бо інакше всі шляхи, вони передбачають шалені втрати, а українців, ну, менше, ніж росіян. Тому мені здається, що це треба, важливо було б транслювати. Дякую.
Thank you, Masi. I give the floor to you now, Olga, please.
Well, something to be done immediately to send all the weapons that Ukraine is asking for, including fighter jets and ATACMS systems. And something in a more strategic sense is to announce that Ukraine is going to be a NATO member and provide support tangible, not just rhetorical, to Ukraine's application that was presented recently.
Thank you. Philip.
If you're talking about sending things now that can help right now, I mean, fixed wing they should have set up months ago, but sadly they won't be able to get fixed wing now that would be able to operate for 4 months. What do you need now? Ammunition. As much ammunition of all types that you can get to Ukraine, including ATACMS, because they would know how to use those with the systems they have. So basically get them everything they can for the systems they have now in place and know how to use so they can damage the Russian army as much as possible in the coming months.
Thank you, Phil. Sven?
I think that everything, well, all that was listed in the previous section of the seminar. Plus, obviously, I mean, as I said, the attrition of equipment and ammunition during wartime is enormous. So we have to keep giving more and more modern and more long-range systems in larger numbers than we have been doing so far. I think it's also the strategically de-escalatory thing to do, because the quicker the more we give now, the quicker we can get out of this terrible war, and the quicker the sooner the Ukrainians will be able to liberate the whole of the country.
Great, thank you. And the last word goes to you, Melinda.
Thanks, Amanda. So everything that my compatriots said, plus something very important, budgetary support. Budgetary support is just as important as all these weapon systems that we've described. Ukraine is not a failed state. Ukraine is not Afghanistan. Its systems, institutions work beautifully and brilliantly. I challenge Amtrak, my national railway, to be as good as Ukraine's railway. It is phenomenal. Their banking systems work, their hospitals work. But if we do not send them the budgetary support, and I'm looking at the EU in particular, the EU has only sent a billion euros of the 9 billion it's promised. Let's do it. Let's do it today. And the international financial institutions also need to put together packages, and they need to have real conditionality as well. It's not just a matter of sending the money blind. We need to make sure that this money goes to the right places and the right people, but we cannot let Ukraine fail. And we let Ukraine fail if we ignore the obvious budget shortages as well as the defensive needs. Thank you.
Thank you. And yes, let's get those checks in the post immediately. I'd like to thank all of our panelists. Unfortunately, we have to, end this discussion now. I mean, honestly, I would have a million more questions related to Ukraine. We could be here all night, but we ran out of time. I think all of you gave amazing insights on the situation in Ukraine, but also, amazing and really important recommendations for what the allies need to do. I mean, 225 days of war, it's a long time, but Ukraine is still standing, Ukraine is still strong, Ukraine is winning this bloody war, but they need the allies to stand with them and be as strong as Ukraine. Everybody needs to carry this weight because Ukraine's victory is our victory, if I can say that. It's Europe, it's the US, it's the allies' victory. So they need to stick at it. Huge electricity bills may come, but it's a short-term issue. Ukrainians are living through huge, big problems every single day of their lives. So we need to bear that in mind and keep doing it, keep digging in, keep providing the money, the arms, and everything else that Ukraine needs. From the side of the EPC, we will be continuing to work on Ukraine through our Ukraine's European Future Programme. Ukraine will one day be a member of the EU as well. So keep an eye out for our future events, our publications, and everything else that we're doing, Twitter Spaces and whatnot. Thank you again for joining me today. I hope to have all of you back in future events. You'll spare some more of your time for us. And of course, the last word has to go to Ukraine. Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава.
Героям слава.
Дякую.